Support for this program provided by
It's January 2013. The dunes on Napatree Point are covered with snow, and the people who make Watch Hill their summer home are mostly gone. The cold winter winds are blowing in from Block Island Sound, but on the other side of the icy harbor, the serenity of winter is being interrupted by the sounds of construction. A small team of architects, preservationists, contractors, and tradesmen are working together with a common mission: to save one of the village's original landmark buildings.
We're taking a building that served a purpose in the community and giving it new purpose and new life that will be sustainable.
This building was set on pretty much a stone foundation, which was just rubble. Somebody took field stones and just put them down and then put timbers on top of it and mortised and tendoned all of that stuff together. And at one time it was straight and true. But as time went on and water came in and receded, it moved dramatically, and a lot of the material in the wood deteriorated through that.
One Bay Street is literally coming apart at the seams. They've stripped off the siding and exposed all of the bones.
You have to lift it so it enables you to do the work necessary to provide the structural base that we need to bring that building back down onto.
Steel beams are temporarily supporting the structure, and a series of carefully orchestrated hydraulic jacks is lifting it into the air. Chains and pulleys apply tension to the old wood.
They lifted the building about 8 feet off the ground. They put cribbing around in different areas in order to stabilize the building. They removed all the rubble foundations, the foundations that were here, and they placed in a new foundation or footing for the building, which consists of helical piles, which are driven into the ground like corkscrews, bond beams or grade beams, which are concrete pieces, and then a slab that's about 8 inches thick with reinforcing it.
When complete, the building will sit almost 2 feet higher than its previous elevation.
That structure, I think, is critical to downtown and to Watch Hill. It has been out of use for a long time, but in the old days it served multiple practical functions, and I think it can, again, it is a important gateway signature building that needs being restored, and that's what we're doing. But I also think it can return to have a true community practical function for open space. I can visualize a theater, just a sort of multi-purpose functions that will benefit everyone.
Watch Hill is located in the southwestern corner of Rhode Island in the town of Westerly. It is a New England seaside village that has stood the test of time, a place that is proud of its rich history and where memories wash over us all like the waves over the sand on Napatree Point. In the decades following the Civil War, Watch Hill was evolving. Hotels and cottages sprung up across the landscape, and with them came a flurry of businesses to support the community. In 1887, entrepreneur and farmer Henry Clinton Lanphier was watching the area transition from farming to a summer colony. Lanphier, or HC as he was known, saw an opportunity and opened a livery stable on Bay Street.
At that time, there were all the hotels that were, thriving, and there was a need for transportation for these people who came by steamer or train. So I think that's where he probably saw the opportunity to have it as a business.
Horses were kept in the livery along with carriages that were used by many guests who stayed in the local hotels. The Narragansett Weekly reported the opening in its June of 1887 Watch Hill notes. As the summer population continued to grow, so did Lanphier's business. A second building was moved to the property and then connected to the original stables to enlarge the facilities.
You could rent a buggy, you could rent horses and a wagon, or you could rent, a carriage of some sort to go and travel around this region if you came here to stay in a hotel.
In 1904, Clinton's son Frederick Orville Lanphier, F.O., took the reins and ran the livery stable in partnership with George Langworthy. By this time, the building was not only used to house horses and carriages, but also the groomsmen who cared for them. Charles Holdridge, whose family would later own the property, describes pieces of the bygone era that remain today.
The horses are on the first floor. You can see the stalls. The carriages go on the elevator, and you would pull it up by hand, go up to the second floor when we had it.
When my uncles and my dad were there, it was the beginning of the automobile age, and the horse and buggies were being phased out, and everything was automobiles.
As you look ahead and see the harbor, that's the beginning of the village. And that is where, when you're in front of Lanphier's garage, you are at the beginning of the village.
Rooms were opened on the upper level for chauffeurs and their families to stay at the garage, just like their cars did.
It was a place for the chauffeurs to hang out and spend the day playing cards, waiting for that call to go pick somebody up. It was probably their little bit of existence when they weren't working down there.
In later years, those rooms were used as staff housing for the local hotels and cottages. As World War II rolled in, a ban on pleasure driving was imposed to conserve gasoline and rubber. Watch Hill was no exception, and an entrepreneurial young man, O. William Stoddard, brought horses back to Lanphier's.
We used to play around up at Mr. Clark's farm on the Shore Road, and I said, there's some wagon wheels hanging from an old shed. So we went to investigate it, and there was a surrey and a buggy, and we got 3 horses. And I would take people around the village for 75 cents. If they want an hour ride, I could go to Weetabog and back in an hour. And that was the main part of the business.
In the years following the war, a new generation was coming to Watch Hill. In the late 1950s, the Holdridge family, who owned a service station just down the road, purchased the garage.
There's a piece of property in the back where there's a house, and the people that own it told me a little story about that when it was the garage, the Holdridge garage, there was another service facility down the street. And some of the people would come here, and you know how everybody is, so, well, I'm not satisfied at this business and what they did. I'm gonna take my business and go to your competitor down the street. Well, little did everybody know that the same family owned both businesses, so it was kind of unique and cute.
Under the new ownership, the garage continued to be a hub of activity in the village and a gathering place for the community.
For some reason, there were a lot of chauffeurs in those days, which there are none anymore. I think someone mentioned one time there was 200 chauffeurs in Watch Hill. That sounds like an ungodly number, and they used to hang around the garage, the chauffeurs, and they would get a call. Both garages, they call into the garage and say, the chauffeur's coming down to pick up the car, and maybe you dust it off if it had been sitting there for a week or so and they didn't use it.
They were a meeting place. They were a place where people would check in. They knew everybody. I think you picked up your papers from them. I think you picked up your gas from them. And you also picked up your news from them.
They had a series of rocking chairs. And some of the local characters would come in, have a little coffee, sit in these rocking chairs, and they would just chat with Jesse, and they knew they had a place to go.
The police stopped there and had coffee and made their calls. There was no radios in the police cars in the early days when we were down there. They'd call from the garage. They're supposed to call in every so often. So we had a lot of action going on down there, and it all revolved around cars, of course.
Upstairs, rooms continued to be available for a new group of summer residents.
When I first came to Watch Hill, they used to rent rooms there, and I remember renting a room. They were not very chic.
Mrs. Hawkins from the Joffrey Ballet called my mother one summer, and she was looking for a place where she could keep them all together. I think before that maybe they were in different locations. She called my mother, and the arrangements were made, and she'd pay a flat fee for the summer, and all the ballet dancers, men and women, would stay there.
Lampheres has seen many changes over the years and weathered many storms.
Hurricane of '38, the most dramatic storm, wiped out Napatree Point, which is very close by, totally wiped it clean of all the summer cottages that were there, and flooded the harbor, flooded where we are now, and the building withstood all of that.
In October of 2012, Superstorm Sandy blew in and damaged several historic properties along the coast. As a result, the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission awarded federal grants to preserve and rehabilitate impacted properties, including the Watch Hill Lighthouse and Lampheres Livery Building. 125 years of standing up to Mother Nature had taken its toll, and the old garage was in danger of falling victim to demolition.
I think that it was important for us to not lose sight of where we've come from.
The building was sort of at the end of its life. And so there was a real desire, real need that people expressed to save it, to do something, to intervene before it fell down.
It's deteriorated to a point where it needs a lot of repair, but it doesn't mean that it's not alive.
It's historic preservation because we're trying to preserve some of this history, but we're not restoring the building in a technical way. We're trying to keep as many of the historical elements as we can, the character-defining features, which is best practice. But it's really a rehab, too, of the space. We're not really using it as a livery stable now. It's going to be used as commercial space on this level, and a public space in the middle. There'll be residential spaces on the upper floors. The building had some of this use in the past, but some of the use is new to the building as well, and certainly new to its original design. So in our parlance of historic preservation, going in that direction is a rehabilitation of the building for new use. Some people call this adaptive use.
This one was the last true historic structure. And I felt that it was imperative that we do whatever we possibly could to preserve it.
This is part of who we are, how we got here. So it's very important to save all of that.
Demolition of areas impacted by the storm surge included some interior walls and an interior staircase. That made way for a portion of the new foundation to shore up the historic structure. The process of saving the old livery stable and garage has been full of surprises and challenges, discoveries and delays. At every step, workers carefully and meticulously cataloged and saved pieces of the original structure. Every door, every brick, was carefully preserved and set aside in order that it might find its way back into the structure. The goal is to restore the building to its original appearance and at the same time preserve its character.
Preservation doesn't mean freezing in time. It means allowing for adaptation and evolution, and to do that in a guided way, in a managed way, so that the essential character is not destroyed.
Well, it's a lot of family history down there, you know. It's just when you think back that 4 generations of my family actually, you know, worked there, lived there. You'd hate to see it get leveled and something else go in.
This is one of the first things that you see when you come down Bay Street and into this Watch Hill area. What better reception could you have than to come to a building that has so much history to it in this area? Why lose that?
Watch Hill has always been welcoming of people, and I think that needs to continue here. We try to reach out to everybody who comes into this community and make them feel a part of a tradition which they may not have had themselves, but they have basically bought into. And I think that cohesiveness is tremendously important. Obviously, the protection of historic architecture is very, very important.
I think we should keep the history of everything. Where did we come from? You know, we got to know where we're going. I think history is important.
And I think it's a gift to just the general public to be able to see it.
The process of restoration and preservation often yields historical surprises.
There was a board with a list of names, and we did recapture that and save it and give it to the proper people so that they could utilize it and try to investigate who those people were.
Early on, an old wagon was discovered high up in the rafters. And inside a nearby wall, an elevator.
It was amazing that you, first of all, would see something that was that old and was used at the time for what it was used for. But we were able to take and with a finger, put it on the largest gear and rotate it, and it would rotate as easily as the day it was installed.
When we were going through this building, we were being told the story of all the different sections of this building because of the type of construction. You know, not every tradesperson or craftsman builds the same way. So we were able to track who was doing what and what they were doing, and they're similarly going to be able to do the same thing in the future.
We see all of the different timbers throughout the whole entire building. In fact, I would argue that they're more exposed now than they were before.
I'm standing right in the old stable area. And this post here that I'm standing next to is really the side of the original barn. And you can see here how weathered and worn this column, this supporting piece is. We think that this has suffered from horses rubbing against it, from vehicles being rubbed against it. And we wanted to save that patina, that historical character that's here. We had to splice in a piece to support it. The bottom of it had rotted out, so it needed a whole new section at the bottom to support it. It's also anchored with these galvanized anchor brackets to the concrete floor that we've poured. This is a whole new floor underneath here that's supporting the building.
What you see above me are the rafters for the shed roof on the north side of the building. The white rafters, which are here, are the ones that were originally with the building. Those are the historic rafters. The rafters that have been put next to them are rough sawn lumber on the opposite side. So each one of the rafters had to be sistered with a new piece of material in order to fortify it for today's code. What the craftsmen have done in the building is that you'll see a field of white rafters if you're looking down in this direction. Well, they took great care to make sure that they put all the rough sawn lumber on the opposite side, so that when you're on the opposite end and you're looking down this way, you'll see that the rough sawn lumber. That goes back to that preserving the building and also telling a story. Later on, when they go to open up this ceiling and they see what's going on, they'll be immediately able to see, oh, aha, you've got rafters here that were historic on this side, and they sistered all the ones on this side in order to fortify it. And also the fasteners are all driven from this side of the material, so that if you're looking at it 100 years from now, you don't see the fasteners over here, you see them here, so that you know that that was part of that reconstruction of the building. This material has been here for over 100 years, and it's still viable material. There's nothing wrong with this. It's actually more dense and older growth than the material that we get nowadays.
We got great examples of old growth wood and new wood. And you can see here that the new wood, look at the rings, they're so far apart compared with the old growth. Right here, you can see the rings are so tight. Of course, these mark growth periods, right? So you can see that this piece of wood is much newer. I mean, it sort of grew fast, and this probably grew much slower, and the rings are very tight together. So what we're seeing here is incredible strength in this wood. It's so dense.
The wood in here is absolutely fantastic. The woods that are all here are left intact. The craftsmen that actually have been working on the building have been taking great care not to disturb the material that is here, that's historic, and they're actually cutting the members around in order for stabilization of the building, in order to keep and preserve that in place.
We restored the windows that we found that were historic old windows. All of the windows in the stable that are behind me are historic windows that are quite old. And then the windows on the third floor, which were here, the historic windows, they had not been replaced.
In today's day and age, you don't get the opportunity to do a lot of this work. And it's exciting, it's challenging, and it's probably second to none. Everybody wants to build something new and say that we're moving on, and that's great, but you have to take our history and a lot of the unknowns of our history, and you have to preserve it, and you have to bring it along. And everybody talks about evolution of mankind and whatnot, and if we don't bring this with us, I feel that we're falling short of a true evolution.
After 3 years of planning and design, permits and delays, and extensive construction, One Bay Street is once again poised to serve the community for the next 100 years.
Right now, we've stabilized the building so that it's not going to decay. If it's maintained for another 100 years, it will be viable for another 100 years without any problems.
This important piece of the Watch Hill Historic District is listed on the National Register of Historic Places.
It is an important gateway signature building that needs being restored, and that's what we're doing. But I also think it can return to have a true community practical function.
Anytime that somebody can do something of meaning to an old structure and bring it back and make it part of the community, that I think is very meaningful, and people should take joy and happiness of doing something like that.
Historic preservation is a way of reminding us where we've been, and without knowing that, it's difficult to know where we are going. Every city, every town has its own one Bay Street, a place that is full of memories and stories, a place that helped to shape and define the community it is a part of, and a place that is a direct link to our past. Every day, builders and architects find themselves at the crossroads, faced with a decision to tear down and start fresh, or preserve what is already in place.
It's almost an intangible kind of feeling that we all have about old places that we may come to enjoy in our lives. They've been part of our lives from the beginning, or maybe something new in your life. But we're drawn to these places because they represent human culture and our presence here for a long period of time.
The old livery stable is once again standing strong. The only horses in town today are those on the merry-go-round at the other end of Bay Street. But this restored building is alive, welcoming visitors, and poised to serve future generations here in Watch Hill. The path to historic preservation is almost always more complicated and frequently more expensive. The rewards, however, can be many for the new users and priceless to the community.
I think buildings are the kind of backbone of any community, and buildings should be attractive and they should serve a purpose.
Support for this program provided by